All right. So recap. Meditation 4. The question that we were looking at, or the meditator looks at in meditation 4, is where does error come from? Okay, so where does error come from? We said this is a kind of theodicy. Remember, theodicy comes from the Greek theos and dike, or an account of God's justice. And usually they're used to, in history philosophy, to explain where evil comes from, whether it be human evil or natural evil. But Descartes here has an interesting take on a theodicy, where it's not so much an account of evil, but it's an account of epistemic error. So believing wrong things. And epistemic error here is equated with moral evil. Okay? Now, we said last time that the meditator identifies two modes. So if you recall Cartesian metaphysics, we got substance, we have attribute, and we have mode. The meditator here identifies two modes for the res cogitans, or the thinking thing. So these are two ways in which the primary attribute of thought can be manifested. One is what I call intellection, and the second is willing. We said that the intellect is always correct. The intellect is infallible. It is the mode that we have, the mode of thought that we have, that always correctly identifies the truth of a proposition. So let's say we have this proposition, call it P. Let's say our proposition is the sky is blue. This proposition, in virtue of it being a proposition, has a potential truth value where it is either true or false. Okay? Now, we're going to call this P. This is our placeholder. The intellect gets hold of this proposition and affirms. In this case, I'm going to go with the sky is blue. The intellect affirms the veracity of the proposition. Okay? But then this also gets kicked down to the will. And the will can choose whether or not it is going to affirm or deny what the intellect determines. So intellect, always infallible. The will, this is where error comes in. Okay? And the meditator sees the existence of both the intellect and the will as proof of God's goodness, because we now have this freedom of choice here, but we also have something that can always lead us in the right direction. So the goal of the meditations that we've been saying is to get the intellect and the will in harmony. Okay? It's to get the two of them lined up where the will always affirms what the intellect deduces. Should that be the case, then one will have successfully rebuilt and continued to build one's knowledge upon firm foundations. Okay. Now we move on to meditation 5. Meditation 5 structurally is, I don't think, overly complicated. However, there's a weird, meditation 5 is just odd. In some sense, it's really odd that Descartes includes this meditation, because he's already done this work. So meditation 5 tries to prove the necessary existence of God. But you're saying, oh, we did that in meditation 3, right? Why are we doing this again? You proved it once, you don't got to prove it twice, okay? There's no, one may think there's no virtue in proving the same demonstrandum twice. If you've done the demonstration, move on. But Descartes does it this proof twice, and I take it, this is perhaps contentious, the difference between meditation 3 and meditation 5 is a little bit slight. So in meditation 3, if you recall, we've been saying that what we properly get at the end of meditation 3 is an infinite substance. But an infinite substance is very far removed from the Abrahamic idea of God. Because remember this Abrahamic idea of God, we have all this omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, etc., etc., etc. Throw in all the omnis in there. We don't really get that in meditation 3. What we do get is an infinite substance, which is contrasted to the finite substance. Meditation 5, however, this is contentious, this is just my read on it. I think we do get an argument for the existence of God, to the Abrahamic conception of God. Okay? And we're going to link up that God is the infinite substance. Okay. Part of meditation 5 is historical, so we'll get there later today. But there's an argument originally proposed by a man named Saint Anselm of Canterbury. You may have heard of Canterbury. It's in England. If you remember world history, the Archbishop of Canterbury is the head of the Anglican Church. This is the church that historically split from the Roman Catholic Church because of Henry VIII wanting a divorce, or several divorces, and the Pope not granting him those divorces. St. Anselm is a monk from that tradition. Okay? And he provides what is commonly referred to as the ontological argument for the necessary existence of God. Okay. And Descartes is going to provide his own account of the ontological argument in Meditation 5. I forewarn you, I put it up on canvas should you wish to read the Proslogion and Malagion from St. Anselm. You don't have to, it's supplemental, it's 100 pages. That's where you find this argument. No one accepts this argument. This is a really bad argument. We're going to look at it and see why it's a bad argument, but it's a bad argument. Even by the time of Descartes, we're talking 200-300 years later, even Descartes' contemporaries are like, that's just a bad argument. Okay? Nevertheless, we're going to see how Descartes interacts with this argument. Okay. So we start Meditation 5. I'm going to erase some stuff. We start Meditation 5 with this discussion of material things, of matter. If you recall, we said that the primary attribute of matter is extension. Extension is merely taking up space. Descartes in the Meditations with Meditator refers to this as continuous quantity. So don't be alarmed, continuous quantity and extension are the same exact term. It's just the wording has changed over the past a couple hundred years. Extension is how it's most commonly referred to now. However, in Descartes' times, continuous quantity was the nomenclature. Now, the meditator draws a distinction here between knowledge of primary attribute, which, remember, primary attribute is the same thing as essence, the what it is to be a thing, versus knowledge of existence. And this is an important distinction, because prior to this time period, well, even post this time period, most of Western philosophy is heavily influenced by Aristotle. And Aristotle has the same idea of essence, and that extension is the essence of material things, what he calls hule, matter. Its primary, its essence is extension. So this is nothing new. Descartes' not reinventing any philosophical wheels here. However, for Aristotle, so this is Aristotle's view. So for Aristotle, if X has an essence, then X exists. Okay? Existence is a necessary condition for something having an essence. You cannot have something existing in the world without it having an essence. That's utterly incoherent for Aristotle, for reasons that I'd love to discuss, but we don't have time to. But Descartes, in the Meditations, has the meditator divorce these two ideas. So for the meditator, one can have knowledge of primary attribute or essence, and this have no bearing on the existence of a thing. So imagine some X, we'll call it a squiggle. I have no idea what a squiggle is. If a squiggle is a real thing, it is not that right now. So call some X, we're going to call it a squiggle. For the meditator, A can know the essence or the primary attribute of X. And this have no bearing on whether or not squiggles actually exist in the world. Okay? For Aristotle, that is an incoherent thought. If A knows the essence of squiggles, then squiggles must exist. But for the meditator, there are two distinct ideas. Knowledge of the essence of something versus knowledge of the existence of something. And right now in Meditation 5, where we're at, is here. So this is where we're at in Meditation 5. We'll get here for ordinary objects in Meditation 6. But in Meditation 5, all the meditator has is knowledge of the essence of things. We don't know that those things exist, but we have knowledge of their primary attribute, or what it is to be a thing of that kind. Okay. Now, where do we have this knowledge of essence? So where does my knowledge of the what it is to be a squiggle, or the what it is to be matter, where does this come from? The meditator maintains that knowledge of essence is innate. If you recall, we said last time that there are 3 different kinds of ideas. And remember, idea is a mental picture. So our 3 kinds of ideas are innate, adventitious, and compound. Starting with adventitious, what it is to be an adventitious idea is to be a mental picture that is derived from something out in the world. So I have an adventitious idea of a green door, but the reason I have that idea is because I have a perception of a green door, and I can then draw up an image in my mind of a green door. A compound idea is taking different ideas and putting them together to create something new-ish. So I can imagine, I can have a compound idea of the door as a person, an anthropomorphic door, and that is clearly just me merging my idea of the green door and an idea of human characteristics. Okay, putting them together, and now I can come up with anthropomorphic doors. Innate ideas are ideas that have always been there. They're there since birth, since conception. Not overly clear, but the important thing for innate ideas is that they are not empirical. Okay? We do not get innate ideas from the external world. That's the key thing. Okay? Now, innate ideas are kind of interesting for Descartes because when it comes to innate ideas, we're not creating ideas. Rather, we're discovering. So innate ideas are discovered. And I take it what the meditator here is focusing on is here's a fancy philosophy word for you, is the phenomenology or the experience of coming up with these innate ideas. So for example, 2 + 2 is equal to 4. The meditator is going to understand this in time as an innate idea. But think about childhood you, or perhaps think of you even now. Let's go beyond 2 + 2 = 4. If I remembered the quadratic equation, I put it up here, but it's a very long time. So I'm going to go with the Pythagorean theorem. You're engaging with the Pythagorean theorem in your other courses, perhaps, and you get it. You finally are like, oh, I get the relationship between the sides of a triangle and its hypotenuse and how that's mathematically represented. So you now have an idea of the Pythagorean theorem. Think about the experience of developing that idea. You didn't create anything in your mind, right? Rather, you discovered it. A light bulb went off, so to speak. This is what the meditator is focusing on when it comes to the phenomenology of innate ideas. That they're discovered, they're not invented. Now that being said, innate ideas have 4 characteristics by which we can understand them as innate ideas. So 1, innate ideas are transparent. So what it is for an idea to be transparent is I can draw it up to my mind. It's not occluded from my mind's eye, so to speak. Rather, I'm able to bring up this idea and work with it. Perhaps the most important, so I'm going to circle 2, is innate ideas are fecund. What does it mean for something to be fecund? It means for it to be fertile, for it to be profitable. So innate ideas are going to be, in many ways, the bedrock of how we come to know the world. Okay, we already had an innate idea in Meditation 3, because the meditator, through the causal argument, argues that she has an innate idea of an infinite substance. And think of the fecundity of that idea. From the idea of from the innate idea of having an idea of God, we were able to move beyond the cogito. So innate ideas have to be fecund. That is, they have to bring forth or produce more material. Okay? We already said, number 3, that is, they are not empirical. You do not have innate ideas of cats and dogs. Why? Because those are empirical. The ideas you have of dogs are empirically grounded. We do not have innate ideas that dogs are mammals, because that is empirically grounded. We figure that out by looking at dogs, looking at how they give birth and nurse their young, and we're looking at other mammals and be like, huh, you guys do that the same way. You're part of a class together. And the last characteristic that we see of innate ideas is that of harmony. And the idea here is that these innate ideas are supposed to flow from proper reasoning. So if we're following the path of the meditations that the meditator has set up before us, then we will come upon these innate ideas in the same way that she does. It's supposed to be harmonious. There's not supposed to be any struggle here. So we're going to need to hold on to innate ideas, because innate ideas are going to do a huge bulk of work for the meditator in the ontological argument. So all of this is working toward this mystical ontological argument. And the ontological argument that the meditator proposes is still problematic. I'll be honest with you, it's still a really bad argument. I think it is. But it's better than Anselm's, and it's going to rely heavily on the material we get from innate ideas. But before we can get there, we need to take a detour into Saint Anselm's ontological argument, because this is all predicated on Saint Anselm. Okay? So we need to understand this argument first. Pull up my other notes. So we get this ontological argument, and it starts with the definition of God. Okay, DF will always mean definition. And the definition we get for God is that let's say this a little better, that substance which none greater can be imagined. The substance that none greater can be conceived. I'm going to shorten this, because that is obnoxious to write out every time, into what is commonly called the greatest possible being. Okay, greatest possible being. Now, remember, we've been drawing this distinction through several lectures already. Possible. Not plausible. We're not worried about the plausibility of God. We're talking about the possible existence. So we have a definition of God, then we get a claim. God exists as an idea. Okay. That is to say that in this case, St. Anselm, the arguer says, look, I have an idea of God. Now, don't get hung up on idea. Different time periods. St. Anselm is writing in the medieval period, or Descartes writing in the early modern period. Idea here does not mean it is not necessarily imagistic. Okay, so Anselm is not saying I have a mental picture of God. Rather, I have a cognition of God. We get a claim here. we have a claim that says a being that exists in the world is better than one that exists only in the mind. Okay. So, you see where this is going, hopefully. A being that exists in the world is greater than a being that exists in the mind. Now we get 4. Sorry for doing this backward. So if God exists in the mind, which we've already said via premise 2, then God exists in the world. Via premise 3. We get this. So, the way the ontological argument, St. Anselm's iteration of it, is supposed to work is predicated upon a latent premise here in premise 3, and it's built upon this idea of a perfection. Okay? Perfection in the medieval period, so I'm going to put medieval definition. This is not the way we use this word anymore, is an attribute or a quality that X can instantiate in degrees. So the medieval understanding of a perfection is that it is an attribute or a quality. Don't get hung up here. We're not talking attribute in Cartesian metaphysics, just a quality or characteristic that something can instantiate in degrees. An easy way to check for medieval understanding of perfection is, can we apply a relative adjective to it? Okay, so here's some examples. Strength is a perfection. Why? Because strength is a quality that something can have, but it comes in degrees. I can say that Jack is stronger than Joe. Okay? Strength is not absolute, it is not a binary concept, rather it is one that admits of degree. Intelligence is a perfection because it is a quality that something can have that admits of degrees. I can say my toddler is smarter than my cat. Okay? Both my cat and my toddler have intelligence to fairly low degrees, but nevertheless they have intelligence. But it's comparative. My toddler has more intelligence than my cat has at times. I'm not sure all the time. We can think of things like practical wisdom. So the ability to just navigate the world well is what we may think of as like street smarts. I can say that Sal has more practical wisdom than Sonny. Okay, he's just more street smart. He navigates the world better. Okay, one more, and we'll give you the problem here with Anselm. Beauty. Beauty is a perfection. Okay, so according to this God, it has to be the most beautiful substance imaginable. We could say that, I don't know, orchids are more beautiful than mums. Okay? It's something that admits of degrees. But here's the problem with Anselm. Look at premise 3. A being that exists in the world is better than one that exists only in the mind. Anselm is conceiving of existence as a perfection. So this is how Anselm is conceiving of existence. This is not a quote, I'm just giving you frame of reference. Anselm is perceiving of existence as a perfection. This is really problematic because existence is not the kind of thing that comes in degrees. Existence in modern philosophical logic is what we call a modifier. That is, it's a binary concept. Okay? X exists or X does not exist. There's no in-betweens of existence. There's no, you exist more. I can't say that, I don't know, birds exist less than cats. Grammatically, it makes sense to the proposition, birds exist less than cats, but practically it makes no sense whatsoever. There's no sense in which something can exist less than something else. And this is the problem with Anselm's argument. And this argument gets famously refuted with the objection is the greatest conceivable island. So the objector, he says, well, let's follow this argument but substitute God or greatest possible being for greatest possible island. I can imagine that there is such an island that has all the perfections to the greatest possible degree. Just because I can, even if I could imagine that, Hume was going to later say that that's nonsense. You have no imagination of that. But even if you did, that doesn't then tell me anything about the existence of the world or what exists or does not exist in the external world. The two are just completely separate concepts. So this is the historical problem with Anselm. And to some degree, what we see Descartes' meditator do is try to pick up the mantle from Anselm and fix where Anselm goes wrong. Does the meditator do that, or does Descartes successfully do that? I leave that up to you. I don't think so, but nevertheless, that's up to you. So, here's how the meditator proposes the ontological argument for the necessary existence of God. So, twofolded. One, this argument is supposed to get us more security in clear and distinct perceptions. This argument is supposed to cement that clear and distinct perceptions, aka innate ideas, can be profitable and fecund for our epistemic development. But also, it's just supposed to kind of help out Anselm. If you're interested, the man who proposes the greatest possible island objection is an Italian thinker by the name of Gaunilo. Okay. So in many ways, Descartes' argument is really similar to Anselm's argument. In fact, there's really only one distinction. So they both start with the definition of God that reads, I'm just going to put greatest possible being, because I don't want to write all that out again. I'm going to expose the latent premise. existence is a perfection. A has an idea. For Descartes, this is going to be a clear and distinct perception of God. Okay? And then, if X, let's rearticulate that. Let's get the actual statement. It is better for X to exist in the world than merely in the mind. Premise 5. If God is the greatest possible being, then God exists in the world. And this comes via 4. God is the greatest possible being. We get this via 1. Therefore, God exists in the world. Both Descartes and Anselm, they're supporting the same exact argument. The argument does not change between Descartes and Anselm. The only place where they differ is with the definition of God. And they don't even differ with the definition itself. So the definiens, the thing defining, they agree that this is the correct definiens of the definiendum. This is the correct definition. However, Anselm simply posits a definition of God. He simply says, this is the definition of God that, let's just run with it. And he's kind of like, yeah, we'll say this is the definition of God. It works. Descartes doesn't do that. Descartes, go back to Meditation 3, where we learned that God is an infinite substance. What Descartes is saying is, look, this is not a random definition of God. Rather, God as the greatest possible being is something that I have a clear and distinct perception of. Okay? Descartes argues that I have a clear and distinct perception of God being the greatest possible being. And if you recall, innate ideas are transparent. They are fecund. They are not empirical. And they are harmonious. So, what differentiates Descartes' version of the ontological argument from Anselm's is that Descartes is trying to provide better grounding for the definition of God than what Anselm does. Whereas Anselm merely posits a definition of God, Descartes says, no, this is not just what I'm positing. This is indeed the definition of God. Why? Because I have a clear and distinct perception of it. And so long as I'm intellecting in a clear and coherent fashion, I can't be wrong about that which I have clear and distinct perceptions of. So remember, we said this about clear and distinct perceptions, that they're not wrong. And in this case, it would seem that the meditator, her will is in line with her intellect. So we're good to go. This is Descartes' ontological argument. Now you ask yourself, what does it get us? One, it gets us Descartes kind of like subbing in for Anselm, like a wrestling match or something. Anselm's on the ropes, about to be knocked out, and here comes Descartes. Descartes swaps in with Anselm and wins the match. That's kind of what, in part, Descartes' really trying to do. It's just an intellectual flex. But on the other hand, for the purposes of the meditations, what this gets us is that we can use clear and distinct perceptions as our epistemic building blocks. Now, we'll talk about this when we do meditation 6 next time. This is what we get from meditation 5. That clear and distinct perceptions are epistemic building blocks. We may run into a problem with that because it's going to seem really cheap. Okay? Descartes, or the meditator, ostensibly is going to start pawning everything off on clear and distinct perceptions, and you may say, slow your roll, Descartes. That's just bad legwork there. But nevertheless, we will get there in meditation 6. So if you recall the title of the meditations, it was to prove the necessary existence of God and the distinction between the mind and the body. We got the God part. We did that twice. We did it in meditation 3 and in meditation 5. But we have not yet been demonstrated the distinction between the mind and the body. What, if you recall from a couple of weeks back, I called substance dualism. This is the other big argumentative aim of the meditations, and this is where we is what we do in meditation 6. Meditation 6, amongst other things, we're going to distinguish between the body and the mind. And it's going to be this distinction that Elizabeth is going to use, and the way that Descartes articulates this distinction. So we'll see this next week, that Elizabeth is going to slam dunk all over Descartes because of the way Descartes articulates this distinction and what comes down to be called an interaction problem. But that's where we're going to be going next time. This is what we have in meditation 5. We've done 2 things. God exists, again, and we can use clear and distinct perceptions as epistemic building blocks. And that's the important bit, that clear and distinct perceptions are the epistemic building blocks. Because if we can clearly and distinctly perceive X, then we know X. And remember, the whole goal of the meditations is to rebuild knowledge. So if I can clearly and distinctly perceive it, or I can ultimately justify something in my clear and distinct perception of X, I'm good to go. That's all I need to do. And that's what we achieved in meditation 5. So we're going to go ahead and stop there. We'll pick up